All right. Welcome to our first lesson on ancient Rome. So, as you see right here, as you see what it says on the slide here, the rise, domination, and fall of ancient Rome. This is the overall theme for the unit. It's not just the rise, domination, and fall of Rome, but the idea of like the rise, the domination, like how civilizations and empires can stay at the top for a while, and then what leads to the eventual fall. We've talked about enough civilizations at this point that I'll be able to make a lot of connections to, say, like the Chinese, the Greeks, the Egyptians, um, and others, about how there's similarities and how they rise together. Like there's certain concepts that each hold to, kind of fundamental principles of how you can rise to power, how you stay in power, and then how you fall from that power. And those are lessons that we are constantly looking at today, especially as Americans, and we look at Rome more than anybody else. Like of all the civilizations we can look at, Rome is number one on the list of things like, okay, what happened to them? What do they do? What did they do well? What did they not do well? And how can we avoid their fate? Because we have copied a lot from them. I know I've said that a lot, but we have copied the Greeks and Romans, especially the Romans, a lot. Now, there's certain aspects that we don't copy. I covered a little bit of that in ancient Greece. There'll be some things we cover in ancient Rome. It's like, no, we're not going to do that one. Or like, Rome, this is where you went wrong in a couple places. I'll talk about like the triumvirate, and we'll talk about that, how a somewhat good idea. We took that idea and made it even better in our society today, but it did not work well for them and actually led to some pretty bad things happening and the disintegration of the Republic on their part. We feel like we added the fix to that, just to give you a little bit of an idea of what we're going to be talking about later on. But through the course of this, we're going to be looking at the basic history of Rome, its beginnings, just some major things that happened. We'll definitely be covering some of the wars of expansion. But then we're definitely going to be getting into, okay, what's the fundamental setup? What is their power based off? How were they able to do so well? With that being said, the first, that's the major overall theme. That's the overall idea of the whole unit. The first thing we got to do is we need to go into some geography. Now, again, like with the other units, I usually have some sort of geography assignment, a map to look at and color in or something like that. In this online situation, kind of hard to do that at the moment. So you're just going to follow along with me as best you can here as I lead you through this. Like there's a lot of terms I'm going to be bringing up that we will say over and over again, that to understand Rome, you have to understand these geographic terms. Again, if you remember our unit on geography, you cannot see what's going on. It's very hard to see what's going on in your mind if you don't see where it's going on in your mind. Okay, so first off, I feel like I can get a better map, but I like the topographical map. It just doesn't list things. I'll kind of write them in for you a little bit. So first off, you need to know that most everything we talk about in the beginning is going to be, with Rome, is centered on the peninsula of Italy, which is on the European continent. Then you have Rome itself. Now, Rome, if you didn't know this before, is right there. Okay? That's where the city of Rome is. The city that becomes this dominant city for, almost, well, you could argue that it's still a dominant city today, but for the idea of a Roman Republic, Roman Empire type thing, about 1,000 years. Now, Rome is centered on a river, just like all civilizations seem to be centered on some river here and there. The Tiber River is right there. And there's a phrase that is used a lot, like we'll say things like the power of the Tiber. That was used a long time ago. And we still use phrases like that today. And this is just one of those things where we copycat the Romans who don't really need to. But they would say things like the power of the Tiber because Rome is centered on the Tiber. Well, the British Empire did that. They'd say the power of the Thames River because London, England, is centered on the Tiber River. And then today with the United States, we say the power of the Potomac because the capital city of the United States, Washington, D.C., is located on the Potomac River. Anyways, there's just some usages there where, people know that rivers are usually the source of life for civilization, so you kind of reference that river for the power from which you sprang. Anyways, a little bit of a tangent, but there you go. Now, the Rubicon River, this is not the same thing. This is one where I'm going to point out where it is because we're going to be getting to a story about Julius Caesar, and this is also a very famous saying in our society even to this day is like, don't cross my Rubicon or don't cross that Rubicon. And this idea that if you do that, you can never go back. Once you make that choice, you can't go back. And it has to do with the story of Julius Caesar, where he's told not to cross the Rubicon River with his army, and he does anyways. So then you have another famous saying, the die is cast. I've made my bet, and let's see if it works out. But the Rubicon is a river that's about right there. Hopefully I got that one right. So again, not a significant river in any way, shape, or form when it comes to just like world geography in general. But for Roman history, it's big. And even in our culture today, it is big because of that saying I told you earlier, don't cross my Rubicon type thing, or don't cross that Rubicon. Okay, the Po River, I only mention this because we'll be talking about it a little bit as we talk about early expansion or early defensive wars against Rome's northern neighbors, two different peoples, the Etruscans and the Gauls. So then you definitely need to know the Alps Mountains. Like one of the things that was a hugely protective thing for the Romans was just all these mountains right here. It's a small mountain range as far as like its size, but its height, it's the third tallest mountain range in the world. Now it's a great geographic barrier. And when you look at the beginnings of Rome, you could say it helped them out in the idea of like not being hit so hard by all those barbarians until they were able to kind of solidify their control of Italy. So, but anyways, you need to know those Alps Mountains because, again, major barrier. Well, one, for having barbarians come down, but then it becomes a barrier even for the Romans as they start expanding out. How do you get through the Alps? Then, of course, you'll also talk about Hannibal and trying to cross those third tallest mountain range in the world with elephants. Okay, Sicily. It is hard to understand Roman history if you do not understand the importance of that island down there of Sicily. Sicily is kind of seen as like the breadbasket of almost just the entire Mediterranean. Not the entire Mediterranean. North Africa still is a big part there too, but definitely for Italy. And it was a huge, how would I put this? When Rome gets control of Sicily, they get access to just such a massive amount of food that it really helps them out a ton. I'll talk more about that later, but you need to understand Sicily because Sicily will play into a lot of stories we talk about. Then you have Sardinia. Sardinia is this island right here. We won't talk about it that much, honestly, but it's one of those things of just, okay, there's a geographic marker. You need to know where that is if we ever talk about that. Now, this is a big one, Carthage. Carthage is actually on the tippy top of North Africa, right down here. And we talked about like Athens versus Sparta with ancient Greece and just the things back and forth they have. When we get to Rome, for a lot of their history, it's going to be Rome versus Carthage. The great epic wars that they have against each other. Anyway, so that's kind of what the geography we're going to be dealing with first, the first couple hundred years of Roman history. We'll cover them kind of quickly until we get into the wars. But then when you look at Rome overall, here is Rome as an empire at its greatest extent. Now, the green off to the side where you see the Kingdom of Armenia and the Empire of Parthia, or the Parthian Empire, which is just like the Neo-Persian Empire. Basically, it's the Persians. That's not part of Rome, although they do go down there and they sack the capital of Parthia quite a few times, actually do conquer a lot of territory from Parthia, but really what you're looking at there, at least with all kind of like the yellow, orangish provinces, is the Roman Empire. The reason why I picked this map instead of just like a big map that just like a solid red type, usually when you see a map of the Roman Empire, it's like this solid red thing. We're just like, oh, Rome's really big. The reason why I picked this one where you see all the names of the provinces is you get the idea that this has a lot to do with just how the Romans governed. They needed to divide up their empire into all these different provinces for the whole purpose of administration, keeping control of things. They didn't, you could say in a way they ruled this from Rome, but not necessarily. They had a lot of provincial capitals that were quite powerful. And then over time, Rome, the city of Rome itself, I should say, actually kind of faded in its power. In the last couple hundred years of the Roman Empire, kind of faded because, well, it's just so far away from everything else. And other cities like Constantinople, Antioch, I don't know if I'm saying this right, Trier, Londinium, these become major centers of power throughout the Roman Empire. So they had like multiple capitals throughout there because, again, it's so far stretched, but they still were connected in the idea of what is Rome. which is kind of amazing when you look at it, that they still stayed cohesive, that had all these different cultures, they had all these different people with all these different languages, a very multicultural, very cosmopolitan society, and they kept things together. And we'll talk a little bit about why. What helped them keep together? Because when you look at this, well, let me just bring everything up really quick. First off, major geographic area barriers you need to look at. The Danube River is this river right here. Yes, it doesn't include Dacia, but largest river in Europe, major barrier, a very good barrier, basically, for the Roman Empire. It's like, all right, that is easy to defend. We can easily defend a river and see when enemy troops might be crossing at some point. But that was a very long border to control. But the Romans did a very good job of it for a few hundred years. Another major border, also defined by a river, is the Rhine River right there. So it kind of looks like the connect. Yes, they both in a way come out of the Alps mountains, you could say. But those become major barriers for the rest of Europe. It's like you hit those rivers, like, okay, time to stop type thing. Those are great geographic barriers to have. Now, other terms are going to be talking about Gaul. Gaul is an area as well as a term for a people, like the Gauls who live in Gaul. And Gaul is basically modern day France, this whole area right there. And you have Britannia. Hopefully that's pretty easy right here. But we'll talk about a little bit later about why they didn't quite go up there. A bunch of naked blue people. It kind of said, oh, no, we're not going to go up there, and we're going to build a wall. Hadrian's Wall, if you've heard that before. Hispania, that's still how you say Spain in Spanish today. Hispania. I just gave you like Britannia, Hispania. We still have these Latin names that have turned into our anglicized names that we still use today. Hopefully you're seeing the connections between just Rome and how we still view our world today, names and everything like that. Greece, we just had our unit on Greece. We talked about it. Still the same area. The Greek world is that whole world right there. Does become subdued and added in as part of the empire. And this is what I was actually getting at a little bit before. And I was saying this multicultural area. When they add in Greece, it really changes the dynamic of the Republican Empire. Whereas you can almost put like a line. I'm not going to really draw the line right now because I don't want to. Well, actually, it might help. Again, this is superficial. If I drew a line right there, it's like everything on this side, on the right side, is mostly Greek-speaking with kind of a Greek-centered cultural look at things. Yes, it's Rome, and even the Greeks view themselves as Romans as far as like governmental and national identity goes, but culturally, very, very Greek. That Hellenization really does stick that we talked about from last unit, that last lesson from last unit. The spreading of Greek culture, that still sticks through the domination of Rome. Whereas this half, the Western half, remains very, very more, Roman, like Latin is the word we use there. The Latin language, the Latin culture, the Latin way of doing things, you kind of have just that split down the center. Both sides consider themselves Roman as far as like we're part of this big overall empire that's awesome to live in. Depends on who you are, but yeah. But Latin side versus Greek side is kind of what it turns into. And we'll see this when we get to the end of Rome, where they actually become very, very separate from each other. And actually at the end of the Roman Empire, it actually splits into two halves. We have an Eastern Roman Empire and a Western Roman Empire with those cultural differences in place. Okay, other areas to know of. I talked about this with ancient Greece. You need to know it again here. Asia Minor is basically all of this. Although we will talk more about specific kingdoms within there this time around and just how the expansion of Rome goes into that area. But you need to know the idea of Asia Minor. Anatolia, if you've heard that term before. Egypt, we talked about Egypt. Still, Egypt is the same area down here. Still a major source of food and wealth, and whoever controls Egypt, you're doing quite well. Last up, small area, seems insignificant, but will play a huge important role through the course of the Roman Empire and just history in general, especially with religion, but Judea, where Jesus Christ is born, the foundation of the Christian religion, arguably the largest religion in the world today, and one of the most, arguably the most influential religion for the last 2,000 years, easily. and we'll talk about their beginnings in this area right here. Now notice on the map it says Syria, Palestine, because when they're first taken over by Rome, they're called Judea. But well, the people of Judea, the Jews, keep rebelling all the time against the Romans, and well, the Romans don't take well to that, and ends up doing what's called the Jewish diaspora, where they just obliterate the place. Like there's not many survivors, and those Jews left are kind of sent away, and they spread out across the Roman Empire to find new places to live. And after that, they renamed it, well, what you see there, Syria Palestina, or just what we call it today, Palestine. Or I shouldn't say, well, that's an area called that until you get to the country of Israel. So if you know where the reason why I put Israel in there is if you know where the country of Israel today is, it's basically Judea/Palestine from the Roman Empire. But that is the birthplace of the Christian religion, which will play a huge factor in the Roman Empire, because the entire empire converts from its, well, quote-unquote, pagan gods or paganism, the belief in Jupiter and Zeus and the gods of Egypt and Norse gods and things like that, to a more the monotheistic religion of Christianity. So I've given you a lot. I'm going to stop the video at this point. I've given you a lot of introductions on what we're going to be talking about as we go on to the next. I don't know how many lessons we're going to have. Quite a few. Hopefully not as many as Greece, but see how it goes. But there's the opening. The whole purpose of this video is to go over the theme of Rome, the rise, domination, and fall of not just Rome, but empires in general, and how it can apply to us today. And then just covering the geography, because these are all places that I'm going to be using these names a lot as we start talking about things and going over different stories with Rome. So that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video.